or to catch things or to put in very much effort at all. I mean, at what point do you pack it in if they're not willing to work with you?
You know, that's the big question, and nobody knows. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. I've worked with couples who were so triggered and had the biggest messes in their marriages that you could imagine, and somehow they moved through it, and they got into wholehearted. They worked it. I've been with couples where one person didn't want to do anything and was resistant. The other person did a lot of work, and the resistant partner changed. And I've been with couples where it didn't work. It's, you know, there's no. Well, obviously, if you're getting hurt, or if your partner is doing abusive, repetitive behavior over and over, then you've got to leave. I mean, you've got to do something to get out of that. That you can't stay in that. But aside from that, there isn't a rule. You know, there's people make lists and there's books about it. You know, here are the reasons you should stay. Here are the reasons you should leave. I don't believe any of that touches it. I think that there's something in us. It's in our body. It's quiet, and it's a knowing that we have to work out with this person, that we are going to hang in there. And there's also a knowing that says, I'm done, and it's quiet. There's not a lot to talk about when you feel that. It's just, I can't do this anymore. And it's not, it doesn't come from the head. It comes from another part of us. Because, you know, there's always, we can justify anything we want, but I think that there's an inherent truth that we get to in a relationship, and we can only get to it by clearing out our own pathway to our intuition. And that truth tells us what to do next. You know, sometimes it's a great spiritual practice to hang in there with a partner who you love and who you have a life with, who doesn't get it, who doesn't get what you're doing with yourself, who doesn't get the language or that you're using, and who you know, who you want to get it, quote, but who doesn't. And it's a great practice to just practice acceptance and to not get triggered by what they're doing. And other times it is harmful to you, it's toxic, but no one can tell you. You got to know that for yourself. What do you think about that?
No, I thank you for clarifying that. I mean, I just recently ended something that was sort of on again, off again, and we were, it just wasn't ever going to go anywhere, and we were trying to maintain sort of a friendship, but it always kind of fell back into the relationship type of situation. And I finally ended it because I felt like I had a moment. All the other times that we'd had big blow-up fights, I'd really contributed to it. In hindsight, I looked and I was like, wow, I really was a jerk. And it doesn't excuse his behavior, but I had to take a lot of responsibility for my part in that. But the last big fight we had, I just took full ownership of everything, and he just attacked, not physically, but I just realized that
verbally, yes.
Yeah, and then I said, you know, I said, like this is getting circular. We'll talk tomorrow. And even the next day, he was still. He would have been ready to just sort of let it go, but there was no like responsibility on his part. And for me, I just like it was a pattern of behavior that I just couldn't accept anymore. But there was that stillness. And part of that is because I decided not to make any major breakup type decisions when I was in that emotionality.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's right. Not from a reactive place, from a deep response. So what happened?
I haven't spoken to him, and it's been a little bit hard because actually over the weekend I found out that a close friend of mine died of suicide. Yeah.
Oh,
and so I
sorry.
wanted, of course, and he knew him just very casually. So I have all these thoughts, like I want to reach out, and I really could use someone to cuddle with, but because I think that if I had ended it out of reactivity, I probably would have been much more likely to fall back into it, like I have so many times in the past. And so I feel it's interesting though, because I feel like I've really learned something this time around. But knowing what we were talking about earlier about how we can gain this vivid insight and then lose it again just as easily. So
yes.
hopefully I won't get caught in that same cycle again.
But you're also talking about something else, which is one of the reasons it's so hard to know what to do when we're in a relationship that is painful or not giving us what we need, is that there is always the struggle comes because we're attached to that person. And even though a lot of things might not be working the way we want them to, attachment is still real.
Mm-hmm.
And so your friend committed suicide and you really wanted to reach out and be connected with him because you miss the attachment. And that's why it's so hard to have any kind of straight answers for this. That's why some relationships, which everyone would think would have hit the dust, make it, because people have so much, they're so invested in that attachment, they do the work. And that's why it's so hard to get out of a relationship, even when it's not good for us. Because even though our friends may say, oh, he's a jerk, or we may look at behavior and say, how could I have stood that for so long? There's another part of it, like with the story we were talking about in my book. There's another part of that person that we loved, that we had hopes for, and we long for that part. So it's a very complicated question. It's not black and white, because attachment is something that gets us through the best of times. It calls us to bring out our best, and it also keeps us in relationships that aren't good for us much longer than we should be in it for our well-being. So I think we need to bring a lot of compassion to ourselves in those critical times in our relationships when we don't know what to do, because it's not an easy answer usually.
And it's interesting because the attachment also, like you had learned so deeply with Dwayne and Charlene, that everyone has a story. I mean, it doesn't excuse bad behavior, but Dwayne was horribly, believe he was abused, neglected, all of these things. I mean, he didn't just decide one day to be a jerk. There was reason for it.
That's exactly right.
And when you have compassion for your partner and you see their wounds, sometimes it's you put up with more than maybe would be good for you because you know where it's coming from.
Well, I think this is the trick, is how we can stay in empathy with everybody, not just with our partner, but to be empathetic, and also to have good, clear boundaries. And we really get them confused with each other. There is having our heart whole for the last stage of this is not about being a wimp and being wholehearted, meaning that you've got a partner who's really doesn't treat you well, and because you're wholehearted, you keep saying that's okay. It means that you have done enough work on yourself where you know how to make a boundary and say, I can love you, and love can be unconditional, but relationships aren't. So wholehearted from a strong place is not a codependent whole heart. It's a whole heart that includes me in the loving, and I know that I have to be treated a certain way if I'm going to be with you. And there are people that I can love but choose not to be with because they hurt me. And so in some ways we become tougher with a whole heart, tougher-minded, but more empathetic and compassionate in that tough-mindedness.